The recycled air hummed a monotonous tune, a counterpoint to the frantic rhythm of Zariah's heart. 12 years old and adrift in a sea of plush leather and hushed whispers, she felt like a misplaced comma in a perfectly punctuated sentence. First class. It was a world away from the cramped rows and boisterous laughter she'd envisioned for her first solo flight. A seat shuffle, a mumbled apology from a harried airline employee, and suddenly she was here, swallowed whole by a luxury she didn't understand. The oversized seat threatened to engulf her small frame. The crisp linen felt alien against her jeans. She clutched her worn backpack, its familiar weight a small anchor in this unfamiliar sea. She didn't belong here, and she knew it. Her gaze darted nervously around the cabin, taking in the gleaming chrome, the soft lighting, the serene smiles of the other passengers. Each one seemed to exude an air of effortless belonging, a silent language she hadn't yet learned. Across the aisle, a man settled into his seat. He was older, his face etched with the kind of lines that spoke of long days and weighty decisions. His suit, the color of charcoal, seemed to absorb the light, creating an aura of quiet power. He moved with an economy of motion, a subtle grace that hinted at a life lived with deliberate control. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, scanned the cabin with a detached air, as if the world outside his window held little interest. Charles Denning, Zariah recalled overhearing, a name whispered with a mixture of respect and something else, something she couldn't quite decipher. He exuded an aura of aloofness, a silent warning against intrusion. Zariah, already acutely aware of her own displacement, shrank further into her seat, hoping to become invisible. The plane shuddered, a deep rumble that vibrated through the cabin. The engines roared, a rising crescendo that swallowed the hushed conversations. Zariah's stomach lurched as the plane began its ascent, the ground falling away beneath them. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window, the familiar world shrinking below, transforming into a patchwork of greens and browns. A strange mix of excitement and trepidation churned within her. This was it, her first flight, a journey into the unknown, a journey that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. He shifted in his seat, the slight rustle of fabric the only sound in the hushed cabin. Then it happened. His gaze, cool and distant, flicked towards her. Just a fleeting glance, a mere brush of acknowledgement, but it sent a shiver down Zariah's spine. It felt like a spotlight had suddenly been turned on her, exposing her vulnerability, her otherness. She quickly averted her eyes, her cheeks burning with a mixture of embarrassment and something else, something akin to fear. Why did his gaze hold such weight? It was just a look, a harmless glance. But it felt like more. It felt like he had seen through her carefully constructed facade, seen the scared little girl hiding beneath the veneer of bravado. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The recycled air suddenly felt stifling. She willed herself to breathe, to calm the rising tide of panic. Mama's words echoed in her mind, a soothing balm against the fear. Breathe, Zariah. Deep breaths. In through your nose, out through your mouth. It's all going to be all right. She closed her eyes, picturing her mother's face, the warmth of her smile, the strength in her eyes. Mama, a nurse, had prepared her for this trip, not just with packed bags and travel tips, but with a quiet confidence that had somehow seeped into Zariah's soul. Remember what I told you about emergencies, Zariah? Observe, listen, trust your instincts. You are stronger than you think. Zariah opened her eyes, the memory of her mother's words a small ember of courage in the vast expanse of her anxiety. She took a deep breath, the cool air a welcome relief. She needed to ground herself, to find something familiar in this unfamiliar space. She reached for her backpack, her fingers tracing the worn fabric. Inside, nestled amongst her carefully chosen books and snacks, was a small, smooth stone, a gift from her grandmother. She closed her hand around it, its coolness a tangible reminder of home, of love, of belonging. The man across the aisle remained still, his eyes closed. The lines on his face seemed deeper now, etched with a weariness that Zariah couldn't quite comprehend. He looked fragile. The word surprised her. Fragile, a word she wouldn't have associated with him just moments ago. He had seemed so imposing, untouchable. But now, in the stillness of the cabin, a different image emerged. An image of a man carrying a heavy burden, a man hidden behind a carefully constructed wall of indifference. Zariah's anxiety began to morph into something else, a nascent concern that tugged at the edges of her awareness. Something felt off. She couldn't put her finger on it, but a subtle shift had occurred, a change in the atmosphere, a quiet tension that hummed beneath the surface. She glanced at the other passengers. They seemed oblivious, lost in their own worlds of books and screens. But Zariah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was a subtle thing, a whisper in the wind, a flicker in the periphery of her vision. But it was there, a nagging unease that refused to be ignored. She found herself watching the man across the aisle, her gaze drawn to him like a moth to a flame. He remained motionless, his breathing shallow, his face pale. The small, insistent voice within her, the voice that had always whispered warnings in the quiet corners of her mind, began to grow louder. Something was definitely wrong. The hum of the plane vibrated through Zariah, a low, thrumming lullaby that did little to soothe the knot in her stomach. 12 years old, and alone, suspended between Baton Rouge and Cedar Rapids, a distance that felt as vast as the gulf between childhood and whatever came next. First class, a last-minute upgrade due to some overbooking mishap, a stroke of luck that felt more like a spotlight, highlighting her ill-fitting jeans and worn sneakers amidst the polished leather and hushed conversations. She kept her gaze fixed on the small screen embedded in the seat back in front of her, pretending to be engrossed in a nature documentary about the Amazon, though the vibrant colors of exotic birds blurred into a meaningless swirl. She felt the weight of unseen eyes, the unspoken judgment of belonging nowhere and everywhere all at once. The man beside her shifted, a rustle of expensive fabric against the plush leather. He was older, his face etched with lines that spoke of a life lived at a different altitude, a life Zariah couldn't even begin to imagine. He hadn't spoken a word since boarding, his presence contained, almost sealed off, like a precious artifact in a glass case. He took a deep breath, a sound that hitched slightly in the middle, a tiny crack in the polished facade. Zariah, hyper-aware in her discomfort, noticed. She couldn't pinpoint what it was, but something felt off. He reached into his briefcase, his movements precise, economical. He extracted a small pill bottle, the kind her mama kept in her purse for headaches. He dry-swallowed a couple, his jaw working beneath the thin skin. Aspirin, Zariah guessed. A headache, perhaps? Or maybe the stress of flying. She'd heard grown-ups complain about that. Still, the subtle tension in his shoulders, the way he kept his gaze fixed on the window, as if searching for something beyond the clouds, it all whispered of something more. "It's just aspirin," he murmured, the words barely audible above the drone of the engines. He hadn't looked at her, the words seemingly directed at the vast expanse of sky outside. "Oh," Zariah replied, her voice barely a whisper. The single syllable hung in the air between them, a fragile bridge between their separate worlds. She wanted to look away, to retreat back into the safety of her simulated rainforest, but a strange compulsion kept her anchored. He turned then, his gaze finally meeting hers. His eyes, a pale, watery blue, held a depth that surprised her. "You flying alone?" he asked, his voice still low, a rumble deep in his chest. "Yes, sir," Zariah answered, her cheeks flushing with warmth. She felt the familiar wave of self-consciousness wash over her. Alone. The word echoed in her mind, a label that suddenly felt heavy with implications. He nodded, the movement small, almost imperceptible. He closed his eyes, his face taking on a grayish tinge. Zariah's heart skipped a beat. Something about his pallor, the way his breath seemed to catch in his throat, triggered a memory. Her mama, a nurse, demonstrating CPR on a dummy at the community center. "Look for the signs, Zariah," her mama had said, her voice firm but kind. Chest pain, shortness of breath, pale skin, these are things you need to notice. The knot in Zariah's stomach tightened, twisting into a cold dread. This man, this stranger beside her, was exhibiting all the signs. He reached up, his hand clutching at his chest, his knuckles white against the dark fabric of his suit. A low groan escaped his lips, a sound of pure, unadulterated pain. Zariah's breath hitched in her throat. Her mind raced, a jumble of thoughts and half-formed fears. What was happening? Was he having a heart attack? Her mother's voice, calm and steady, echoed in her ears. Time is of the essence, Zariah. Every second counts. Sir, are you okay? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. She knew the answer, but the question needed to be asked, a desperate plea for denial in the face of a terrifying reality. He didn't respond. His eyes were closed, his face contorted in a grimace of pain. He was struggling to breathe, each gasp a ragged, shallow intake of air. Zariah's mind whirled. She was alone. He was alone. But she wasn't really alone. Her mother's lessons, her mother's voice, were with her. They filled the silence, guiding her, pushing her forward. Get help, her mother's voice urged. Don't hesitate. Zariah pressed the call button, her finger trembling. Excuse me, miss, she said to the flight attendant who appeared, her voice strained. I think something's wrong with the man next to me. She gestured towards a man, her hand shaking. The flight attendant's trained eyes assessed the situation in a heartbeat. Sir, she said, her voice sharp, professional. She knelt beside him, checking his pulse. Her face, initially calm, paled slightly. We need a doctor, she called out, her voice rising above the hum of the plane. Is there a doctor on board? The plane, once a cocoon of hushed serenity, became a hive of activity. Zariah watched, a silent observer in the midst of the unfolding chaos. The weight of the moment, the enormity of what she had just witnessed, settled upon her, a heavy cloak of responsibility and awe. She had acted instinctively, driven by a force she didn't fully understand. And in that act, she had become something more than just a girl on a plane, lost in the vastness of the sky. She had become a lifeline, a fragile thread connecting this stranger to the world of the living. The hum of the plane vibrated through Zariah's small frame, a low thrum that resonated with a nervous flutter in her stomach. First class. She'd never imagined she'd be here, amidst the plush leather seats and the hushed murmur of polite conversation. A seat shuffle, a kind stranger, and a last-minute upgrade had landed her in this unexpected haven, a world away from the cramped confines of economy. She traced the intricate stitching on the headrest with her fingertip, the smooth leather cool against her skin. It was a stark contrast to the worn fabric of her backpack, nestled under the seat in front of her. She felt a pang of self-consciousness, a small voice whispering that she didn't belong. The man beside her, his face etched with lines of weariness and an air of quiet authority, had barely acknowledged her presence. He seemed lost in his own world, a world Zariah couldn't begin to fathom. His suit, the subtle sheen of expensive fabric, the glint of a gold watch on his wrist, spoke of a life far removed from her own. He'd offered a curt nod when she'd taken her seat, his eyes distant, and then retreated behind the pages of a financial journal. Zariah had been relieved. Less pressure to make conversation, less chance of embarrassing herself. He shifted in his seat now, a small sigh escaping his lips. Zariah glanced at him, her gaze drawn to the slight tremor in his hand as he reached for the glass of water on his tray table. He fumbled, the glass tipping precariously, spilling its contents onto the crisp white linen. He didn't react, didn't seem to notice the spreading stain. Something felt wrong. A prickle of unease danced across Zariah's skin. This wasn't just weariness. It was something more. Her mind flashed back to her mother, a nurse, patiently explaining the signs of stroke, the subtle indicators that often went unnoticed. The drooping face, the slurred speech, but what about a heart attack? Hadn't Mama mentioned something about silent heart attacks, about how sometimes the signs were different, more subtle? A cold dread settled in Zariah's chest. The man's face, now ashen, The beads of sweat on his brow, the way his breath hitched in his chest, had all clicked into a terrifying picture. "Excuse me," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the gentle hum of the plane. He didn't respond. Panic clawed at her throat. "Excuse me," she repeated, louder this time, her voice trembling. Still no response. He seemed to be staring blankly ahead, his eyes unfocused. "Excuse me, Sonia." Zariah's voice, fueled by a sudden surge of adrenaline, cut through the hushed atmosphere. The flight attendant, a woman with a kind smile and efficiently pinned-up hair, turned from the galley, her eyebrows raised in question. "Something's wrong with him, Sonia." Zariah pointed to the man beside her, her small hand shaking. Sonia's smile vanished, replaced by a look of professional concern. Her eyes quickly assessed the situation, taking in the man's pallor, his labored breathing. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked, her voice calm yet firm. He didn't answer. His eyes fluttered closed, his head lolling against the headrest. "He's not all right," Zariah insisted, her voice tight with fear. I think he's having a heart attack." The words hung in the air, heavy with urgency. Sonia's movements became swift and precise. She knelt beside the man, checking his pulse, her face etched with growing alarm. "Someone call the pilot. Medical emergency," she shouted, her voice sharp and commanding. The hushed calm of first class shattered. Whispers rippled through the cabin, heads turning towards the unfolding drama. Zariah sat frozen, her heart pounding against her ribs. The world around her seemed to blur, the sounds of concerned murmurs and hurried footsteps fading into a distant hum. She watched, mesmerized, as Sonia and another flight attendant worked on the man, their faces grim, their movements efficient. Oxygen masks appeared. A blood pressure cuff was tightened around his arm. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, his tone calm but authoritative, announcing an emergency landing. A strange sense of detachment washed over Zariah. It felt as though she were watching a scene unfold on a screen, a drama playing out before her eyes. She couldn't quite grasp the reality of the situation, the fact that she, a 12-year-old girl on her first solo flight, was at the center of this unfolding emergency. Her thoughts drifted back to her mother, her warm smile, her reassuring voice. "Knowledge is power, Zariah," she'd always said. "Knowing what to do can make all the difference." And in this moment, her mother's words, her lessons, had given her the power to act, the courage to speak up, the knowledge to recognize the silent signs of crisis. The plane began its descent, the engines roaring, the cabin tilting sharply. Zariah closed her eyes, her small hands gripping the armrests. Fear warred with a strange sense of calm. She had done what she could. She had spoken up. She had raised the alarm. The rest was out of her hands. Later, much later, after the chaos had subsided, after the paramedics had rushed the man off the plane, a kind-faced airline representative named Kim approached Zariah. "You were incredibly brave," she said, her voice soft and reassuring. "The doctor said your quick thinking saved his life." The words hung in the air, heavy with significance. Zariah looked down at her hands, still trembling slightly. Save his life. The thought echoed in her mind, a strange mix of awe and disbelief. "He's a very important man," Kim continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Charles Denning. He has a daughter. Estranged. He hasn't seen her in years. He's been trying to find her, to reconcile. If it weren't for you," Kim's voice trailed off, her eyes filled with unshed tears. Zariah's heart ached with a sudden, unexpected pang of sadness. She thought of her own mother, of the warmth of her embrace, the comfort of her presence. To be estranged from your own child, to carry that burden of regret, it was a pain she couldn't comprehend. Days later, in a quiet hospital room, Zariah stood beside Charles Denning's bed, his assistant, Angela, having arranged the visit. He looked frail, his face pale against the white pillows, but his eyes, once distant and aloof, now held a flicker of warmth, of gratitude. He reached out a trembling hand, his touch feather-light against her arm. "Thank you," He whispered, his voice hoarse. You saved my life." Zariah looked at him, her heart filled with a strange mix of emotions. Relief, gratitude, and a profound sense of wonder at the unexpected turns life could take. A chance encounter, a seat shuffle, a silent cry for help, it had all led to this moment, a moment that would forever alter the course of both their lives. The harsh fluorescent lights of the Memphis airport terminal seemed to amplify the tremor in Zariah's hands. Around her, a cacophony of worried murmurs and the insistent chirping of departing flights formed a dissonant symphony. Just minutes ago, the controlled chaos of an emergency landing had ripped through the calm of their journey. Now, the aftermath felt like a surreal dream. She watched, mesmerized and slightly nauseous, as paramedics wheeled a stretcher through the throng, the still form beneath the blanket undeniably Mr. Denning. Had I really just, the thought trailed off, unfinished, lost in the swirling eddy of disbelief. She replayed the scene in her head. The subtle slump of his shoulders, the almost imperceptible change in his complexion, the strange stillness that had radiated from him like a cold draft. Her mother's voice, a constant presence even across the miles, echoed in her memory. "Sometimes, baby, the quietest emergencies are the loudest." Mama's words, usually applied to fevers and rashes, had taken on a chilling new meaning. A woman with kind eyes and a Southwest Airlines uniform knelt beside her. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" That was quite something. Zariah swallowed, her throat dry. "I think so." The words felt hollow, inadequate. Inside, a tempest raged. What if I had been wrong? What if I had overreacted? The thought clung to her like the chill that still lingered from the air conditioning on the plane. But then another voice, firmer this time, cut through the doubt. "Mama always says trust your gut." And I did. The other passengers, a disoriented flock herded into a designated waiting area, began to piece together the fragmented narrative of the emergency. "Heart attack." She overheard someone whisper, the words heavy with gravity. "Silent one. Didn't even make a sound." Zariah hugged herself tighter, the overheard conversation a physical weight on her chest. Silent. Like him, Mr. Denning had been a quiet presence throughout the flight, an island of stillness in the bustling first-class cabin. She remembered the hesitant way he had declined the pre-flight beverage, the slight tremor in his hand when he reached for the magazine. Details she hadn't registered at the time now seemed laden with significance. "Was it you who noticed it?" A woman with fiery red hair and a voice that carried across the room addressed her directly. Zariah flinched, the unexpected attention making her skin prickle with discomfort. Yes," she stammered, feeling a blush creep up her neck. The woman's gaze softened. "Well, you were amazing. Quick thinking. She might have saved his life," she announced to the room, her voice ringing with conviction. A ripple of murmurs, now tinged with admiration, washed over Zariah. A strange mix of emotions warred within her: pride, embarrassment, and a lingering unease. The weight of responsibility, the sudden shift from anonymous passenger to accidental hero, felt heavy and unfamiliar. She longed for her mother's calming presence, the familiar scent of her lavender perfume, the comforting weight of her hand on her shoulder. While waiting for an update on Mr. Denning and the rescheduled flight, Zariah absent-mindedly rummaged through her small backpack. Her fingers brushed against something unfamiliar, a folded piece of paper tucked between her sketch pad and her copy of The Secret Garden. She pulled it out, recognizing the crisp linen of the napkin from the first-class cabin. Unfolding it carefully, she saw a few lines written in a shaky hand, the ink still slightly wet. Her breath hitched. It was Mr. Denning's handwriting. How, when the words blurred as she read them. "Tell my daughter I forgive her. Tell her I'm sorry." A simple sentence, yet it reverberated with a lifetime of unspoken emotions. The carefully crafted facade of the aloof businessman crumbled before her eyes, replaced by a glimpse of a vulnerable, regretful man. The weight of his words settled in Zariah's chest, a profound sadness mingling with a lingering adrenaline. She knew, with a certainty that transcended her 12 years, that those words held a story, a secret heart hidden beneath the surface. Suddenly, the hushed whispers around her felt intrusive, the curious glances heavy with unspoken questions. She clutched the napkin tighter, a tangible link to the silent drama that had unfolded in the skies. The airport, no longer a temporary transit point, became a stage for a private performance of human emotion, a quiet symphony of regret and forgiveness. She looked towards the closed doors where the paramedics had disappeared, her mind replaying the man's pale face, his closed eyes. "Tell my daughter." The words echoed in the silent chambers of her heart. But who is his daughter? And how will I find her? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, a new mystery unfolding in the wake of the averted tragedy. The journey, she realized, was far from over. It had merely taken an unexpected and profoundly altering detour. An airline representative, a young woman with a name tag that read Kim, approached her. "Zariah?" Kim's voice was gentle, her smile genuine. "We have an update on Mr. Denning. He's stable, and they expect him to make a full recovery." Relief washed over Zariah, a wave so powerful it almost brought tears to her eyes. That's wonderful," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. Kim continued, "His assistant is on her way to the hospital, and she's asked to speak with you. Is that all right?" Zariah nodded, her mind still reeling from the weight of the note in her hand. The assistant, the hospital, the note, each piece of the puzzle felt significant, a clue to a story yet untold. The fear she had felt earlier, the fear of being alone and out of place, began to recede, replaced by a strange sense of purpose. She had a message to deliver, a promise to keep. And in that moment, beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of the Memphis airport, 12-year-old Zariah Coleman felt a quiet strength bloom within her, a strength born not of heroism, but of empathy and a deep, unspoken understanding of the hidden currents of the human heart. The Memphis airport hummed with a low, persistent thrum, a symphony of rolling suitcases, echoing announcements, and the hushed murmur of countless conversations. Zariah sat perched on the edge of a stiff, plastic chair, the airport's cacophony a stark contrast to the pressurized silence of the plane just an hour ago. Her hands, still slightly trembling, clutched a crumpled napkin. It was the same napkin she'd used to press against Mr. Denning's chest, a tangible reminder of the surreal events that had unfolded. She'd save a life. The thought, still foreign and unwieldy, bounced around in her mind, a fragile butterfly trapped in a glass jar. Had she really? It felt more like a dream, a blurry sequence of adrenaline and instinct. A woman with a warm smile and a neatly pressed navy suit approached. "Zariah Coleman?" she asked, her voice gentle. Zariah nodded, her throat suddenly dry. This was Kim, the airline representative they'd told her about. Kim gestured towards a small, sterile room, its walls adorned with generic travel posters. "Would you mind coming with me, sweetie? We just have a few questions." Zariah's stomach tightened. Questions? What kind of questions? She hadn't done anything wrong, had she? The thought pricked at her, a small seed of anxiety blooming in the fertile ground of her uncertainty. She followed Kim, her legs feeling heavy, each step echoing the unsteady beat of her heart. Inside, the room was even more impersonal than the waiting area. The air conditioning hummed, a constant, low drone that seemed to amplify the silence. Kim gestured towards another chair, this one slightly less stiff than the last. "Please have a seat." Zariah sat, her gaze fixed on the napkin in her hands. It was stained, a testament to the urgency of the situation. She wondered if Mr. Denning was all right. She hadn't seen him since the paramedics rushed him off the plane. The memory of his pale face, his labored breathing, flashed before her eyes. She pushed the image away, focusing instead on the smooth, cool surface of the table in front of her. "Zariah," Kim began, her voice soft yet professional, "we understand you played a crucial role in assisting a passenger on your flight." Zariah nodded again, still unable to find her voice. "We'd like to understand exactly what happened. Can you tell me what you saw?" Zariah took a deep breath, the sterile air filling her lungs. She recounted the events, her voice hesitant at first, then gaining strength as the memories flooded back. She described Mr. Denning's unusual stillness, the subtle changes in his complexion, the way his hand had clutched his chest. She explained how she'd remembered her mother's words, a doctor herself, about the signs of a silent heart attack. The advice, offered casually during a dinner conversation weeks ago, had somehow lodged itself in her memory, a life raft in a sea of uncertainty. Kim listened intently, her expression a mixture of concern and admiration. She occasionally jotted down notes on a small pad, her pen scratching against the paper, the sound sharp in the quiet room. When Zariah finished, a heavy silence settled between them. Kim's gaze lingered on the crumpled napkin in Zariah's hands. "And this," she said gently, "this is the note Mr. Denning gave you?" Zariah's fingers tightened around the napkin. It felt strangely important, a tangible link to the man whose life she might have saved. She hesitated, a flicker of reluctance running through her. She hadn't even read it. It felt private. But Kim was waiting, her eyes kind yet expectant. With a sigh, Zariah unfolded the napkin. The ink was smudged, barely legible. It was a name, a single word scrawled in a shaky hand. Eleanor. Zariah handed the napkin to Kim, her heart pounding a strange, uneven rhythm against her ribs. Who was Eleanor? A wife? A daughter? The name hung in the air, a silent question mark. Kim examined the note, her brow furrowed in thought. Before she could speak, a brisk knock echoed through the room. The door opened, and a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of quiet authority entered. Angela Davies, she introduced herself, extending a hand toward Zariah. Mr. Denning's personal assistant. Zariah shook her hand, surprised. Why would Mr. Denning's assistant be here? Angela turned to Kim, a brief exchange of words passing between them, hushed and professional. Then, she turned back to Zariah, her expression softening. "Zariah," she said, her voice low and earnest, "Mr. Denning is awake." Relief washed over Zariah, a wave of warmth spreading through her chest. He was alive. It was real. She had truly made a difference. "He's okay," she whispered, the words barely audible. Angela smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached her eyes. "He's stable," she confirmed. "And he asked for you." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Asked for her? Why? Zariah's mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. She was just a 12-year-old girl, a nobody. Why would a wealthy, powerful man like Mr. Denning want to see her? The questions swirled around her, a dizzying vortex of confusion and anticipation. She looked from Angela to Kim, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and apprehension. The sterile room, the airport's constant hum, the questions, the note, it all seemed to fade into the background, eclipsed by the single, powerful realization that her life, in some inexplicable way, had become intertwined with the life of a stranger. And in that strange, unexpected intersection, something profound had shifted. The fragile butterfly in the glass jar had spread its wings. The antiseptic smell, sharp and sterile, clung to the crisp white walls of the hospital room. It mingled with the faint, metallic scent of something indefinable, something that whispered of illness and vulnerability. Zariah shifted uneasily in the stiff plastic chair, the vinyl clinging uncomfortably to her jeans. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor, a steady pulse in the otherwise quiet room, filled the silence with a strange, unsettling life of its own. Her gaze drifted from the pristine white curtains to the intricate patterns of the linoleum floor, avoiding the still figure in the bed. This was strange, surreal. Only yesterday, this man, Charles Denning, had been a stranger, a silent presence in the first-class cabin of a plane. Now, because of her, he lay here, tethered to machines, his life hanging precariously in the balance. A wave of self-consciousness washed over her. Was she intruding? Should she have come? Her mother had insisted, saying it was the right thing to do, but Zariah couldn't shake the feeling that she was an unwelcome guest in this sterile sanctuary. A faint rustle broke the quiet. Charles Denning's eyes, previously closed, flickered open. They were a startling shade of blue, like the deep ocean depths Zariah had only seen in documentaries. He focused on her, a slow recognition dawning in their depths. A weak smile touched his lips, crinkling the corners of his eyes. You're the girl, he murmured, his voice raspy, barely a whisper. Zariah's heart fluttered. He remembered. Of course, he remembered. How could he not? Yes, sir, she replied, her voice barely louder than his. I'm Zariah. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. When he opened them again, a flicker of something unreadable, something akin to sadness, passed through them. Zariah, he repeated, savoring the syllables. The name seemed to hold a special significance for him, a resonance that Zariah couldn't comprehend. He looked at her, a strange intensity in his gaze, as if searching for something hidden beneath her surface. You remind me of someone, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, the words hanging heavy in the air. Zariah blinked, taken aback. Remind him of someone? Who? She searched her mind, trying to place the familiar note in his voice, the subtle shift in his expression. It felt heavy, laden with a history she couldn't possibly understand. A long silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the steady rhythm of the heart monitor. Zariah felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She wished she could disappear, melt into the sterile white walls, become invisible. My daughter, Denning finally said, breaking the silence. The words were soft, almost lost in the quiet hum of the hospital room, but they struck Zariah with the force of a physical blow. His daughter? But why? What did she have in common with his daughter? He shifted slightly, a grimace of pain flickering across his face. She would have been about your age, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. He paused, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond the walls of the room, lost in a memory Zariah couldn't access. Zariah's mind raced. She wanted to ask questions to understand the connection he saw between her and his daughter, but the words caught in her throat. The air seemed thick with unspoken words, with a grief so profound it threatened to suffocate her. We were estranged, Denning continued, his voice laced with a regret so raw it made Zariah's chest ache. A foolish argument. Pride. Stupid, stubborn pride. He closed his eyes, a single tear escaping and tracing a path down his weathered cheek. I never got to say goodbye, he whispered, his voice breaking. The confession hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in on Zariah, pressing down on her with the weight of his sorrow. Zariah's carefully constructed composure crumbled. She reached out, her hand hovering hesitantly over his. She wanted to offer comfort, to somehow ease the pain that etched itself across his face, but she felt clumsy, inadequate. What could she, a 12-year-old girl, possibly say to a man grappling with such a profound loss? He opened his eyes, his gaze meeting hers. In their depths, she saw a flicker of something akin to gratitude, a fragile spark of connection. He weakly grasped her hand, his grip surprisingly firm. Thank you, Zariah, he murmured, his voice barely audible. Thank you for forgiving me a second chance. A second chance. The words resonated deep within Zariah, echoing the unspoken regret in his voice. A second chance to reconcile, to mend broken bridges, to say the words left unsaid. A second chance he had been denied with his daughter, a chance that Zariah, unknowingly, had given him. In that moment, the sterile white walls of the hospital room faded away. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor became a distant hum. All that remained was the shared space between them, a space filled with a profound understanding that transcended words, a silent acknowledgement of the fragile, interconnected nature of life. Zariah, a young girl on her first solo flight, had inadvertently stumbled into a role far greater than she could have ever imagined. She had not just saved a life. She had become a vessel of hope, a tangible reminder of the preciousness of time and the enduring power of forgiveness. And in doing so, she had unknowingly embarked on a journey of her own, a journey of self-discovery that would forever be intertwined with the life of the man whose hand she held. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Zariah's bedroom floor, the kind that stretched and distorted familiar objects into something almost otherworldly. Dust motes danced in the golden rays, a silent ballet only she seemed to witness. She sat at her small desk, the worn wood cool beneath her fingertips, a letter clutched in her hand. It wasn't the cheap paper of a bill, nor the glossy sheen of a magazine subscription. This was heavy, textured stock, the kind that whispered of importance. It had arrived that morning, an unexpected ripple in the placid pond of her life. The return address, a Cedar Rapids law firm, meant nothing to her. But the name within, Charles Denning, resonated with a quiet hum of significance. He was a stranger, yet intimately connected to a pivotal moment she couldn't quite shake. The memory of the flight, the chilling stillness of Mr. Denning in his seat, the frantic scramble for help, still prickled her skin. She hadn't thought of herself as brave then, only desperate, fueled by a primal urge to do something, anything, to mend the unsettling silence that had fallen over the first-class cabin. Her mother's voice, a constant echo in her ear, even thousands of miles away, pressure on the chest, clammy skin, shortness of breath. Zariah, those are signs you can never ignore. Had it only been a few days? It felt like a lifetime ago. She unfolded the letter, the crispness of the paper a stark contrast to the tremor in her hands. Mr. Denning's words, elegant and formal yet tinged with a warmth she hadn't expected, filled the page. Gratitude, deep and sincere, poured from each sentence. He spoke of her quick thinking, her courage, how her actions had quite literally saved his life. He wrote of second chances, of the precious gift of time she had unknowingly given him. He wrote of his daughter, estranged for years, a rift he now desperately hoped to mend. A daughter who, he revealed, had studied pre-med, a path abandoned after a bitter disagreement. He had believed it a waste, a foolish dream. Now, faced with his own mortality, he saw it differently. He saw it, Zariah realized with a jolt, through her. A 12-year-old girl, armed with her mother's wisdom, had inadvertently shown him the profound value of a life dedicated to healing. Along with the letter, a thick manila folder lay on the desk. Inside, a collection of university scholarship applications, their pristine surfaces gleaming under the sunlight. Each one represented a possibility, a future she hadn't dared to dream of. A future Mr. Denning was offering her, a gesture so grand, so unexpected, it left her breathless. This wasn't just gratitude. It was a profound act of faith, a belief in her potential that resonated deeper than any praise she had ever received. The air in the room seemed to thicken, the dust motes swirling with a newfound energy. The weight of his words, the enormity of his gesture settled upon her, not as a burden, but as a strange, exhilarating pressure. It was the pressure of expectation, of responsibility, but also of hope. A hope that bloomed in her chest, fragile yet vibrant. She closed her eyes, her mother's face, etched with worry during their hurried goodbye at the airport, flashing behind her eyelids. The anxiety she had felt then, the fear of being alone, seemed so trivial now. A new thought, sharp and clear, pierced through the haze of her emotions. She thought of Mr. Denning's daughter, a phantom figure shrouded in regret and missed opportunities. A woman who, perhaps, carried the same burden of unspoken words, of unmended bridges, that Mr. Denning had carried until she, Zariah, a complete stranger, had inadvertently forced him to confront them. An overwhelming urge to reach out, to offer a connection, however small, gripped her. She reached for a fresh sheet of paper, the blankness a stark invitation. The words flowed then, not as carefully crafted prose, but as an outpouring of empathy, a reflection of the quiet understanding that had blossomed within her. She didn't presume to offer advice or solace. She simply wrote of her own experience, of the fear and uncertainty she had felt on that flight, of the instinct that had propelled her to act. She wrote of her mother, a woman whose strength and wisdom were a constant source of comfort and inspiration. She wrote of the quiet power of knowledge, of the ability to make a difference, however small, in the lives of others. And she wrote of Mr. Denning, of the quiet dignity he possessed, of the vulnerability he had unknowingly revealed, a vulnerability that had touched her deeply. Folding the letter, she tucked it carefully into an envelope addressed to the law firm, a silent plea to bridge the gap, to offer a whisper of hope in the midst of what she imagined was a sea of complex emotions. She didn't know if her words would reach Mr. Denning's daughter, or if they would make any difference at all. But the act of writing, of reaching out, had a profound effect on her. It was a quiet affirmation of the change that had taken place within her, a shift in perspective that redefined her understanding of courage, of compassion, and of the interconnectedness of human lives. She was no longer just Zariah Coleman, the anxious 12-year-old girl on her first solo flight. She was Zariah Coleman, a girl who had faced fear and acted, a girl who understood the weight of words and the power of empathy, a girl who, in the quiet solitude of her bedroom, had glimpsed the profound beauty of human connection, a connection forged in the crucible of a crisis, a connection that had changed her, perhaps forever. The fluorescent lights of the school cafeteria hummed, a dull, insistent drone that usually faded into the background noise of chattering students. But today, the hum seemed to vibrate against Zariah's eardrums, each pulse a tiny echo of the frantic rhythm of the flight attendant's voice. "Is there a doctor on board?" A week had passed, but the memory clung to her, sharp and vivid, a kaleidoscope of fear and adrenaline. She pushed the lukewarm mashed potatoes around her plate, the plastic fork scraping against the flimsy tray. Her stomach churned, not with hunger, but with the lingering unease of a world tilted on its axis. Everything felt different. The mundane clatter of trays, the shrill laughter of her classmates, even the familiar smell of disinfectant, it all seemed coated in a thin film of unreality. Had it really been me? She thought, the one who saved him? She'd recounted the story countless times to her mother, to the airline representatives, to the local news reporter who'd somehow gotten wind of the story. Each retelling chipped away at the raw edges of the experience, smoothing it into a narrative, a story she could almost believe. But the quiet moments, like this one, were when the true weight of it settled in her chest, a heavy, unfamiliar presence. It wasn't the fleeting fame, the awkward congratulations from classmates she barely knew, or even the hushed whispers that followed her down the hallways. It was something deeper, a quiet understanding that the world was a far more fragile place than she'd ever imagined. Across the table, Maya Sanchez picked listlessly at her lunch, her usual bubbly demeanor replaced by a quiet dejection. Zariah observed her, the way Maya's shoulders slumped, the way her gaze drifted to the untouched carton of milk. Usually, Maya traded her milk for Zariah's fruit snacks, a ritual as predictable as the sunrise. But today, Maya seemed lost in her own world, a world Zariah suddenly recognized, a world tinged with a loneliness that mirrored her own. Before the incident on the plane, Zariah would have retreated further into herself, lost in the labyrinth of her own anxieties. But something had shifted within her, a subtle recalibration of her internal compass. She saw Maya's quiet despair, not as something to be avoided, but as a reflection of the vulnerability she herself had experienced, the terrifying realization that the world could change in an instant. "Want to trade?" Zariah asked, her voice barely a whisper. The words hung in the air for a moment, fragile and tentative. Maya looked up, her eyes widening slightly. A flicker of surprise, then a hesitant smile. "Really?" Zariah nodded, pushing the unopened pack of fruit snacks across the table. "I'm not really hungry for them today." Maya's smile broadened, a genuine, grateful curve of her lips. "Thanks, Zariah." She reached for the milk carton, her movements regaining a hint of their usual energy. "Here," as they traded snacks, a simple, almost insignificant exchange, Zariah felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. It wasn't the dramatic, life-altering relief she'd expected after saving Mr. Denning. It was something quieter, a gentle hum of connection, a recognition that even small acts of kindness could ripple outwards, creating tiny pockets of warmth in a world that often felt cold and indifferent. Later that evening, nestled in the familiar comfort of her bedroom, Zariah recounted the day's events to her mother. Tamika listened patiently, her warm gaze holding Zariah's as she spoke. When Zariah finished, Tamika reached out, her hand gently cupping Zariah's cheek. "You know, Zariah," she said, her voice soft but firm, "what you did on that plane, it was extraordinary. But what you did today, with Maya, that shows true strength." Zariah looked at her mother, confusion clouding her features. "Viewed it was just a snack." Tamika smiled, a knowing, loving smile. "Sometimes, the smallest gestures are the most powerful. You saw someone in need, and you reached out. You didn't need applause or recognition. You did it simply because it was the right thing to do." Zariah's eyes welled up, not with sadness, but with a sudden, overwhelming sense of understanding. She thought of Mr. Denning, his face pale and drawn, his hand clutching hers in silent desperation. She thought of Maya, her slumped shoulders, her quiet despair. And she thought of herself, the scared, anxious girl who'd boarded that plane a week ago. She was still scared, still anxious, but now there was something else there too, a nascent strength, a quiet confidence that bloomed in the shadows of her fears. She had faced the unknown, and she had emerged, not unscathed, but changed, forever altered by the weight of a life saved and a kindness offered. The world still felt fragile, but now she understood that fragility wasn't a weakness, but a reminder of the preciousness of every moment, every connection, every small act of grace. And in that understanding, she found a strength she never knew she possessed.